masterminding events, planning agents in governments and corporations in order to gain political power and influence, and to establish a new world order. Now, central to some of the more widely known and elaborate conspiracy theories, the Illuminati have been depicted as lurking in the shadows and pulling strings and levers of power in dozens of novels, films, TV shows, comics, video games, and music videos. In other words, a few drops of truth and a few gallons of piling on, if you would. Now, there was a guy named Adam Weishaupt. He was a professor of canon law and practical psychology at the University of Ingolstadt. This was back in 1773. Now, he was a professor, but he was the only non-clerical professor at an institution ran by the Jesuits. Now, this university had been dissolved in 1773 by Pope Clement XIV, but the Jesuits, they still had the purse strings. In other words, they had the money. And in all organizations, including the Catholic Church, those with the money still have the power. So even though the Pope shut down the college, the Jesuits says, nah, we've got enough money, we'll run it ourselves. The Jesuits did most of the teaching at the college. But Andy Weishaupt was the only non-clerical professor. In fact, he was a professor there, but the Jesuits didn't like him. In fact, they made constant attempts to frustrate and discredit all the non-clerical staff, which really was primarily Weishaupt. Okay, they said that it was either too liberal or too Protestant. Now, Weishaupt became deeply anti-clerical because of all the non-love he got from the Jesuits. And so he continued to spread the ideas of enlightenment, as he called them, through some secret society of like-minded individuals. Now, at first he wanted to get into Freemasonry because of the day, the big counterculture group of the day were the Freemasons. But getting into the Freemasons was expensive, and Weishaupt didn't have much money, and they weren't open to some of his new ideas. So what does one do when you can't get into Freemasonry? You start your own organization, and that's what he did. He called it at first the Covenant of Perfectibility, later changed it because that sounded too strange. He called all the guys in his organization perfectionists, and he also took the owl of Minerva as the symbol, the wise old owl. In fact, the members also used aliases within the society because they didn't want to be. They didn't want the academia to know who they were. Okay. Weishaupt, actually, his moniker was Spartacus, and others had other monikers as well. Now, in April in 1778, the order became known as the Order of the Illuminati, after Weishaupt had seriously contemplated calling it the B Order. So that's the basically how the Illuminati began. It was a for real organization with for real people, and it was a for real deal. Okay, now it lasted a few years. And then that was kind of it. It kind of went by the wayside. There was no more. There was no more Illuminati because I guess it just petered out. But several recent and present-day fraternal organizations claim to be descended from the original Bavarian Illuminati and openly use the name Illuminati. Now, there's an Illuminati order. There's the Ordo Templi. There's other organizations. However, there's no evidence that any of these present-day groups have any real connection to the historic order. In fact, they've really not amassed any significant power or influence. They're kind of just a bunch of guys who sit around as a modern-day think tank. So, the original Illuminati was for real. It was a group of free spirits who got around and talked about how things really needed to be. In other words, it was the original think tank. The original group of free spirits, the original counterculture guys who just sat around basically and talked about how things really needed to be. Now, let's fast forward to the Bilderbergers. Now, the Bilderbergers, they're a for real organization. They're around. In fact, they've been around since 1954, okay? And they have an annual meeting every year. And the Bilderbergers exist. And again, This is information from their website. The Bilderbergers have a website. The Illuminati, of course, didn't, because in 1776, there was no internet. But there is now, and they have a website. In fact, the group's agenda originally was to prevent another world war, because they formed it. It was to prevent to get a dialogue between Europe and North America to prevent another world war. Now it's defined as bolstering a consensus around free market Western capitalism and its interests around the globe. In fact, participants include political leaders, experts from finance, industry, academia, and the media. And there's anywhere between 120 and 150 members of the Bilderbergers. Attendees are entitled to use information gained from meetings, but not necessarily attribute it to a specific speaker. This is to encourage candid debate while maintaining privacy, a provision that has fed conspiracy theorists from both the left and the right. In other words, when they release their document as to what people said, they'll say, gentleman number 1 said this, gentleman number 2 said that, gentleman number 3 said this. But those theories, statements are never attributed to the individual. And they do that to encourage the individual to speak his mind. Now, the meetings were chaired by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands from 1954 until 1976. The current chairman is a gentleman named Henry, or Henri, because he's French, Henri de Castres. He's the former chairman of the AXA Financial Group, a French corporation, a French financial group. Now, the first conference was held in the Hotel de Bilderberg in Oosterbeek, Netherlands. That was in May of 1954. It was initiated by several people, including Polish politician in exile Joseph Redinger, who was concerned about the growth of anti-Americanism in Western Europe. Because remember, there was a big communist influence in Eastern Europe, and it was moving west at that time. Now, Redinger proposed an international conference where leaders from European countries and the United States would be brought together with the aim of promoting Atlanticism, a better understanding of the cultures between the United States and Western Europe, to foster cooperation on political, economic, and defense issues. Now, Redinger approached Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, who agreed to promote the idea, together with former Belgian Prime Minister Paul van Zeeland, and then the head of Unilever, the multi-billion-dollar multinational company, Paul Rieckens. And Bernhard, in turn, went to a guy named Walter Beetle Smith, who was then the head of the CIA in the United States, who asked Eisenhower advisor Charles Douglas Johnson to deal with the suggestion. Now, the guest list was drawn up by inviting 2 attendees from every country, one to represent conservative and one to represent liberal points of views. 50 delegates from 11 countries in Western Europe attended the first conference, along with 11 Americans. So 11 Europeans, 11 Americans. Now, the success of the meeting led the organizers to arrange an annual conference. A permanent steering committee was established with Redinger, the Polish ex-politician, appointed as the permanent secretary. Now, as well as organizing the conference, the steering committee also maintained a register of attendees' names and contact details with the aim of creating an informational network of individuals who could call upon one another in a private capacity. Now, conferences were held in France, Germany, and Denmark over the following 3 years. In 1957, the first U.S. conference was held on San Simeon's Island in Georgia, and it was funded by a $30,000 gift from the Ford Foundation. In fact, the Ford Foundation also sponsored funding in 1959 and 1963. So there you have it. World leaders all met, said things that were published but were never attributed to the individuals, and this was funded by industry. Can you understand why the conspiracy theorists loved talking about the Bilderbergers? Now, the participants between again, like I said before, between 120 and 150 people, political leaders, et cetera, media guys, academia. 2/3 now come from Europe, the rest from North America. 1/3 from politics and government, and the rest from other fields. Now, historically, attendee lists have been weighted down towards bankers, politicians, directors of large businesses, board members of publicly traded companies, including IBM, Xerox, Royal Dutch Shell, Nokia, and Daimler. Heads of state include King Juan Carlos of Spain, Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands. They've attended those meetings. A source connected to the group told the Daily Telegraph, the British publication, back in 2013 that other individuals whose names were not publicly issued may just turn up just for the day. In other words, the biggest movers and shakers, not just old school British royalty, show up at these meetings unannounced, and they don't stay for very long. Now, what do they do at these meetings? Well, again, the group's original goal of promoting Atlanticism and strengthening U.S.-European relations and preventing another world war has grown to the Bilderbergers' theme being to bolster a consensus around free market Western capitalism and its interests around the globes. In fact, in 2001, Dennis Healy, who was one of the Bilderberger Group founders and steering committee member for 30 years, said, in quotes from the website, "To say that we were striving for a one-world government is exaggerated, but not wholly unfair. Those of us in Bilderberg felt we couldn't go on forever fighting one another for nothing and killing people and rendering millions homeless. So we felt that a single community throughout the world would be a good thing." Again, when the statement like that is made by one of the founding members of the group, you can understand why they're called globalists. Because they are. And according to the webpage of the group, again, these meetings were conducted under the Chatham House rules. And what that means is they allow participants to use any information they gain during the meeting, but not to disclose the names of the speakers or any of the other participants. Now, there was a former chairman named Etienne Divanon back in 2011. A major attraction of the Bilderberg Group meetings is that they provide an opportunity for participants to speak and debate candidly to find out what major figures think without the risk of cutting off comments and becoming fodder for controversy in the media. A 2008 press release from the American Friends of the Bilderbergers stated the Bilderbergers' only activity at its annual conference and at the meetings is that no resolutions are proposed, no votes are taken, no policy statements are issued. However, they just kind of talk and listen to one another. And they can quote what these individuals said, but they can't name names. In other words, they can say, at the Bilderberger meeting, one of our members said this, but they can't say who the member was. Again, that allows people to speak truly freely, because if somebody goes off the reservation and says something very strange, they may or may not want their name attributed to that. Okay? Now, back in November 2009, the group hosted a dinner meeting at the Chateau, am I even going to say this? Chateau de Duchess in Belgium. I'm probably butchering that name. But anyway, it was outside of its annual conference to promote the candidacy of Herman van Rompuy, who for the president of the European Council. So the Bilderbergers were almost the precursor to the European Union. The Bilderberger meetings are unofficially called the Bilderberger Group, Bilderberg Conference, or the Bilderberg Club. Now, their organizational structure: meetings are organized by a steering committee with 2 members from each of approximately 18 nations. Official posts include a chairman of the Honorary Secretary General. Honorary Secretary, I've lost my place here. Honorary Secretary General, but they also have a separate advisory group with overlapping membership. Lots of different people in the past have been parts of the Bilderberger Group, including, I'll just read a quick list. Joseph Johnson of the Carnegie Endowment, William Bundy, president of Princeton University, Theodore Eliot, who was a former U.S. ambassador to Afghanistan, Kashmir Yost, Georgetown University Institute Study for Diplomacy. So these are a lot of academics and former politicians who were involved in the Bilderberger Group. Now, according to James A. Bill, the steering committee usually meets twice a year to plan programs and discuss